I'm Yvonne Hamoud, registered social worker and owner of New Moon Counseling, but out of the office, I'm a mom, wife, daughter, sister, and friend. Join me each week as I sit with a special guest to discuss everyday things that impact our mental health. We'll be chatting about everything from mental health and relationships to media and current events, as well as personal experiences and reflections, all in the hopes of normalizing our humanness and helping you see that you're not alone. This is Outside the Therapy Room. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Outside the Therapy Room. Today, I'm joined by Bethany. It's your first time here.
I know, first podcast.
This is exciting.
So excited.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm Bethany. I've been at New Moon Counseling for almost a year in January, so that's exciting. Something fun about myself lately is whenever I'm not here at work or at my other job, I've been beading a lot. Like, I do a lot of crafting. Now I'm doing it's like a bead
bracelets?
loom.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So a lot of earrings lately.
Cute.
And it's so fun and so relaxing to do while I'm watching a show. So that's what I'm doing when I'm not here. And it's really lovely. Yeah.
Well, one day we did a whole beading, friendship bracelet thing here at work, and you were doing some crazy flowers with it.
That was my training day. I was
really?
brand new.
And then you fell in love with it?
Yeah, I was no, I'd been doing it before that.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I've been doing it for a while, but I'm just always learning new things with it, which I think is so fun about crafting. It's you learn one thing and then move into other spaces, and I've started doing some markets here and there, which is really fun. So.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah,
so it's very exciting to have you here. Today we're talking about a topic I think we hear about a lot, which is how do you recommend or suggest therapy to someone in your life? Because there can be many different ways to suggest therapy and many ways not to suggest therapy.
I think more often than not, sometimes it's done in an inappropriate way.
Yeah.
That can make therapy seem even further accessible or further stigmatized, which I think is really hard. So yeah, it's a good topic because this is a daily life thing, I feel. Especially being a therapist, it's we need to watch how we're bringing therapy to other people. So yeah.
So let's get into it then. Let's start with what not to do.
Okay.
Because I think that's
a good way to start. Yeah.
Way to start. We hear often, we see it too, in the media. Sometimes the suggestion of therapy is done kind of like an insult. Ugh, you need therapy.
Yeah, you need help. You need to stop doing whatever you're doing because it's affecting me.
Yeah.
It just seems almost it
on the other person.
Yeah, the narrative of almost anger management, right? You need to fix yourself.
Yeah.
And I just don't like how that sounds because A, that's not even really what we do in therapy.
Yeah.
B, it's just, I think it makes therapy feel really like a judgmental space or a space where we're going to fix you. And we don't do that.
No.
So yeah, I just feel the setup is really important.
Yeah. I mean, it's really nice that people are wanting to suggest therapy when it's actually something that they think is going to help and support the other person. But yeah, when it's done as an insult, it makes you feel like you're crazy, and it does distance yourself from actually getting therapy because you have one view of it, right? This is where people go when everyone else doesn't like them, or anger management or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it kind of creates more of that stigma that we're trying to really break down. So.
Or even then too, it's if you were to decide to go to therapy, is it coming from my friends or the people around me don't like me, and so I have to move into this space? Because one of the first things too that we do in a first session even is we talk about your sources of support.
Yeah.
We talk about the people that you have in your life. And so therapy can be the addition to that, but not the source where you go where you have no one else to support you. So it's we don't want to isolate someone who's reaching out for help, because it's a really beautiful and special thing and comes from a lot of pain. And yeah, I feel the way that it's done has the potential to be really kind.
Yeah.
And really human, I guess, too.
And like you said, you described therapy as being the support to the support people you have in your life. And so when you feel like you don't have that support, or when it's negative towards therapy, then you're sitting in there in the therapy session just focusing on all of the suggestions that other people have of how you need to change, which sometimes isn't what you actually want or need therapy for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like you don't want it to turn into the I told you so conversation either. Right? Like if you did end up going because of one of these one-off comments, you need help, you need therapy, are you going to be scared of the, well, good, because you need it? Like we don't need to like double end the idea of therapy with jabs in a way, because it's not helpful. And going to therapy for the first time can actually be really scary. Even just reaching out, like if you're not someone that talks about what's happening for you, the idea of talking to someone that you don't know can be really intimidating. So we need to make sure that the support is there in your personal life.
Yeah, I think it individualizes that person too, and saying like, this is only something that you can do to support yourself. Like I'm thinking just with like teens or couple relationship, it's like, oh, you need therapy. It's like, you are the problem. Go and get your shit together so that we can be okay. And that's not the case. Like, again, that's why there's couples and family therapy. And even for teens, like it's important for parents to be involved in that process too. And so, just individualizing that person as the issue isn't gonna help anybody.
And then to me, it makes me wonder too, like, if we are the person that's saying you need help, you need to go to therapy, are you yourself seeking therapy?
Yeah.
Because there can be a lot of work done in feeling like it's hard to support someone in your life. You know, supporting them, knowing that they don't go to therapy feels really heavy, feels like something that you're taking responsibility for. Could it be something where you could have more boundaries? You know, that's where I kind of see it as, if we're the person that's saying you need help, you need therapy, what are we doing to make sure that we're caring for ourselves in order to be open to the people around us?
Yeah.
Not to say that like everyone needs to go to therapy in order to not harm or have effect on other people, but to say like, if we're encouraging something, sometimes it comes from the side of like, I've experienced it, I've gone to therapy, this is how it worked for me. And then the comment of you need therapy is coming more so from a place of therapy could really help you.
Yeah.
Because this is this for me. You know?
Yeah. And that's when, you know, that's kind of in the direction where we're going, is how to support people. And I think that that's definitely one piece of it. The other part too is like self-awareness. If we're pointing fingers and saying, if this person seeks therapy, then we are going to be okay. You're not looking within to have that self-awareness of, okay, wait a second, what's my part of this conflict or this, you know, relationship? Are there things that I can do to improve this relationship as well? And it's having like that self-awareness, which sometimes, like, you know, when we make those comments, we might see the other person as a problem. And so then we really need to kind of come back into ourselves and be like, okay, wait up. Like, there's two people, there's two people here. Like, you know, do I also need to seek support? Does this person need to seek support? How can we do this in a way that's going to benefit our relationship in the long run?
Exactly. And also to say too, if you are struggling with people in your life who you feel need therapy but aren't going, then you can find help for that, because that is impactful. It's allowed to be impactful because maybe it feels like there's a lot on your shoulders and you don't have the source to talk about what's happening for you, right? Like, we might be the support person to a lot of our friends.
Damn truck.
Back up that truck, for real. Great work. You might be the main source of support for your friends or your family, and it loads on to the point where, do you feel like you have the person to talk to?
Right.
Is it mutual in your relationships? And maybe right now it's not, in which case therapy could be right for you, because you could say, well, I have all these people in my life that I'm supporting, but it's draining and it's hard to maintain.
Right.
So thinking about that, right? Like, if we're the person that's saying you need therapy, let's consider too that therapy could be effective for you to not feel like those people are draining your life, but that you're capable of supporting them or capable of setting boundaries for how much you support them.
And to understand why they may be draining you.
Yeah.
Right? Like, why does the conflict keep coming up? Have you ever been on the receiving or giving end of you need therapy?
Probably both.
Yeah.
Definitely both. I see it a lot in my life too. Like people talking about people around them, like, oh, she needs therapy. And it's kind of like, maybe she does.
Yeah.
But let's keep in mind that, like, sometimes we come to that space on our own. I think for myself, I don't think I ever heard, this is going to sound full of myself. I don't know if anybody said to me that I need therapy as much as I wanted it for myself.
Yeah.
Like it was really about being an advocate when I was having a hard time. And then I had the really positive approach where I had a lot of people around me who had just started therapy too and said, honestly, it's so nice to just talk to someone that doesn't know you. Something as simple as that really brought me to therapy, and it made me feel like, okay, this is so different to have a time of 50 minutes that is genuinely about me. I didn't actually even consider this career path until I had gone to therapy myself and was like, oh my gosh, it's magic.
It's magical.
It's so fun. It's so warming, and it feels like it opened me up, and I think it made me a better support to my friends too, because I was like humanizing my own experience too. That was really helpful. And I think it helped me be able to say to others, like, this is what therapy does for me. This is what I started therapy for. And it really helped. Like in that instance, it was breakups.
Yeah.
And so people around me were going through breakups all the time. And I would say, like, I'm happy and here to support you. And I found it really helpful to talk to someone else.
Yeah. This is like the good way to approach that.
Exactly.
Like, you know, I did have someone, I think we've talked about this throughout the podcast, but I'm a sensitive person. So I'm very in tune with my emotions. And sometimes I just cry out of nowhere. Well, not out of nowhere. Something brings it up.
Me too.
But when that's happened before, someone said like, wow, you really need to go to therapy. Like you need to get your emotions in check. And I was like, and I had already done therapy, and I went to that person. I was like, you know what? Like, let's have a conversation. Like, why do you think I need therapy? Yeah. Like, thankfully we were close. And so I was able to have that conversation. And it, like, I don't remember if it was something that person was aware of, but I recognized that they were uncomfortable with my feelings. And so then I was like, okay, Yvonne, maybe this isn't the safest place for me to like be that open right now, because they're uncomfortable with my feelings and like crying. Yeah. So I was already going to therapy. And so I just made that comment. I'm like, you know what? Like, I'm already seeing a therapist. Like, thank you. And just kind of moved on. But I have gone to, you know, family members, like my poor brother, like where I've been like, look, I can't be your therapist. I love you and I want to take care of you, but I think you need to talk to somebody else about this that isn't so close to you. And so again, like, I think that was more of like a positive approach to suggesting therapy. I
think what's so interesting about your story there too is I would wonder if you did go to therapy, they would probably really like normalize and be compassionate about being a sensitive person.
Yeah.
Like you know, the statements of you need therapy are maybe coming from like, you need to fix and stop that behavior.
Yes.
Of being really emotional, crying for no reason. Oh my God,
I love my emotions.
But then your therapist is probably saying like, those emotions have value.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's so interesting.
You know what? That's exactly
what we're actually going to therapy for is feeling okay about having those feelings, as opposed to shutting them down and not experiencing them.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting because, you know, even the statement of like, I actually am going. And maybe we talk about how these feelings are okay.
Yeah.
And, you know, the additional part of that and how much of that feeling can I share with this friend.
Right.
Is
that was
important,
just like my own boundaries with this particular
like I would
friend.
just, you know, we see a lot of people and I'm also very sensitive. And I think that sensitivity is beautiful and really okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah.
That was a fun chat.
Good for you for saying like, actually, let's talk about this.
Yeah.
It's hard. I feel like it really pokes at a vulnerability of like, actually, I am going. So thank you for that.
It started a great conversation, honestly. But yeah, like what I think it can when that conversation is open and when you're able to approach somebody with love and care and give the suggestion of therapy, it can can be a great opening to having like more conversations about it and being able to communicate about like the support and the care and all of these things that you value in that person. And it can, you know, help and benefit the relationship when it's done appropriately. I think like obviously when we do it as an insult or like, ugh, you need therapy, like that creates more distance. But when you're able to sit down with someone and say like, look, I've done therapy, you're going through something similar, you know, I think this would be really beneficial. It can just, be like a moment where you're being seen. And I think it can help the relationship.
I agree. I'm trying to imagine what it would be like to kind of say that without having therapy experience, because that exists too, right? Like, it's not to say that you have to be going to therapy in order to suggest therapy to someone else, but I think it humanizes it. And by that I mean, like, it says, I was struggling with this, or I've been struggling with something in my life, and at one point did seek out support for it.
You're being vulnerable in that moment when the other person is already in a place of vulnerability. Yeah,
it's that creating that closeness to say, what you're dealing with right now is not abnormal and something that I want to push away, but it's something that I don't want you to be stuck in. I think that's the way that I may have suggested therapy with people in my life is I first kind of talk about my experience, like, oh, I just had a really good therapy session. I talked about this and it was so helpful. And then, you know, I have lots of friends in my life who are seeing their own therapist too. So it's these really nice, warm conversations of, you know, what did your therapist think about that? And so I think it creates this neutral zone of like, we all see our doctors, we go to the dentist, we need physio here and there. Sometimes that means we need therapy too. And I think that it creates it as like a point of care that we can all seek out at some point in our life. So just normalizing it that way, that it can be more than just the source that you go to when you're really, really struggling or impacting other people. Like, it's actually something that could have a lot of space in your life for no matter what you're going through, or to prove where you're at right now is not permanent and something that can be worked on in a really active way through therapy. I like the example of, we don't say to like our best friend, like, hey, can you go to my dentist appointment to get that filling that I need? Like, we have to go, right? Like, we have to go and do it ourselves. And so I think having the perspective of, but what does therapy do for the individual that's going to it? Because that's the person that's going to show up and the person that's going to put the time in. And so instead of saying like, it would be helpful for you to stop doing that to me, it's to say it would be helpful for you to learn about what you're doing and how you're doing it and how you could do it better, or how you could be supported better. And not this narrative of like, you need to change, but the narrative of there are things you can do that don't feel like the stuck point that you're at.
So what would be some helpful ways that people, I mean, I think we've already talked about some, but like, what are some like more concrete things to think about when we're wanting to suggest therapy to a loved one? I think one thing we've already talked about is being mindful of your wording. Like, and like your tone, like when we're being mindful of communication, we also have to talk about nonverbal communication or tone of voice, like timing. I think timing is so huge. Like
timing and where and when you're doing it.
Yeah.
Are you doing it in front of other people?
Yes.
Are you doing it from a feeling of you being annoyed, or are you doing it from a feeling of you being empathetic?
Yeah.
I think is a major difference. Yeah, I think ideally probably not with too many other people around, unless you're all having like a cohesive conversation about therapy.
Sure. And it's a safe space that, you know, that person actually feels safe. And like, you know, there's going to be some areas where I'm totally fine being called out and I'll thank the person for that. And there's going to be other moments where I'm like,
please don't do that.
Don't call me out and embarrass me in front of these people.
Cry.
Yeah, exactly. But like, I think it's important for us to be mindful of these things. And also, how is that person feeling? If they're already in a pretty rocky place, regardless of how we might communicate it, it may not be absorbed in the way that we want it to, right?
And talking about that idea of like, can it create more distance? You don't want that person to now think, okay, great, this is another person in my life that I can't talk to.
Yeah.
So I think maybe something I would want to include in the wording is I'm still going to be here to support you.
Yes.
I'm not saying go get a therapist so you can leave me alone. I'm actually saying let's widen your circle of support.
Yes.
I'm here, you've got other friends, you've got your family, and then your therapist can be a part of that circle as well. I think that's helpful to say, like, I'm not abandoning you, and I'm not saying that I never want to hear about these issues because they're important in your life. And as a friend or a partner, I have my limits in how helpful I can be to you because sometimes I have a stake in the game. Whereas your therapist will be that outside third party that doesn't have a stake in the game, doesn't know who you're talking about. And it's a time that's really allowed to be about you.
Yeah.
Whereas even in the best of friends conversations, we're still 50-50 on talking about our own lives and then switching and talking about their life, right? So...
Or talking about someone else. If it's like, oh, this third friend is annoying me and venting, then you're kind of like that person's being put in a really challenging situation. Everything that you just said, yes, 100%. And also being able to have that additional support and communicating the I'm still going to be here helps people so that they don't feel like they're the issue or feel abandoned in some way.
Yes.
Because I think you're right. Depending on where that person is at and where the friendship is at, they might be like, oh, well, I'm just not going to share anything with this person and isolate themselves further. And so I really liked how you said, you know, how can we expand your circle of support instead of like, here, you just go into this space and talk to your therapist about these things so that we can still be okay.
Right. Like, so that we can have space from your life when it's actually kind of just spreading it out a little bit more so that people have the energy and, you know, fresh eyes to be able to support what you're going through.
Yeah.
Plus, I mean, and this comes with a certain level of comfort, right? Like some of us will go to therapy and never tell anyone. When I first started seeing a therapist, it was the second therapist I had seen. I didn't feel comfortable telling anyone in my life. It was during COVID and I felt like embarrassed because it was the field I wanted to be in too. So I felt like, oh, of course, I'm the one that needs therapy and yet I'm the one that wants to be a therapist. And it's like, actually, no. Exactly.
Yeah.
Like that's why this is the right field for me, right? So I think some of us are not going to be comfortable talking about the experience of therapy. If you have the people around you where they are comfortable with that though, I find those conversations really amazing.
Yeah.
Being able to say like, oh, my therapist asked me this question and it really stuck with me. I love going down that rabbit hole with friends because it's like, oh my gosh, that's a genius question. That's so smart. And I never would have thought of it because I know you. And so I think it's so additive for your life where it can turn into like, because you've had a good therapy session, you can leave and kind of grow on those ideas with the people in your life if you feel comfortable. Because I think that makes the next therapy session all the more impactful and kind of sustains that you're doing the work from session to session, just by kind of talking about it with friends or reflecting on it on your own personal time.
And it benefits those friendships because that person may not be able to support you in the way you might be seeking. And so just having that like added like level of support. And I love what you said. Like there's so many memes out there of like, you know, my friend's therapist said this, or, you know, when your friends know your therapist by their first name, like, you won't believe what Tina said to me or whatever. Like it is really, I don't know. I think it really does kind of bond people with that too, right? Just to summarize, mindful of what you are saying and how you're wording things, being aware of environment. Maybe that person wants to have that conversation a little bit more privately, or if you feel like they would be comfortable, maybe sharing it in front of other people, but in a way that comes from support, in a way that comes from, hey, we're here to support you. And I think this would also be beneficial. I think like we've mentioned already, like sharing your own experience can be really beneficial in that conversation as well. And just the reminder of you're not losing us. We're also here and we're happy to hear you out between sessions or, you know, just as friends. And still like have things to go to your therapist with. How about for couples? Because I think right now a lot of the suggestions we just gave are for friendships or for individuals. But I don't know about you, but in my practice, both in and out of the therapy room. Like there's always one partner that is maybe in therapy,
Yes. Yeah.
and they're wanting their other partner to, maybe move towards couples therapy. And that can be really, really tricky.
I feel like there's a lot of fears around it.
Yeah.
If I were to go to couples therapy, is it admitting to having struggles in the relationship? Is it the beginning of the end kind of feeling? And I think that a lot of that is severely stigmatized in terms of, we see couples therapy on TV all the time and they're screaming at each other.
Yeah.
That is not what a couples session necessarily looks like.
Yeah.
Have you seen Couples Therapy, the show?
No, I haven't.
Okay, you need to watch it.
Everyone's telling me to watch it, but I'm just like,
it's life-changing.
Is it? Okay.
It's amazing. So Dr. Orna, she works with couples in New York. She's a psychologist and a psychoanalyst. I don't know if I'm going on a tangent, but I have a point. I find in her work, the best thing that I learned about couples therapy in that way is when we're having a tough moment in a relationship, being present is way harder than you would think it is. I think we instantly move into feeling attacked, feeling defensive, and kind of putting that up front. So getting through to your partner in a moment of struggle is really, really hard because there's a lot that's kind of blocking them. That's why I feel couples therapy can be that really neutral space to say, let's slow down the pattern. Let's see what we're putting up in front of being present so that we can be present. In which case, that's something that could benefit any couple. I think it's likely that there will always be one partner that wants to go a little bit more than the other. But I think similar to what we were talking about with individuals is the fears that we have around it are often based on myths of therapy, that we're really damaged if we're going, that we need something to be fixed. And I think the idea of couples therapy can actually be a great way to get to know your partner in a way that's kind of hard in a moment of struggle. And so it has a lot of benefits in that way of being like, sometimes you need that third party that can hear your pattern, hear your back and forth, and then say, wait a minute, what you heard out of that is actually not what she said or not what he said.
It's like the defenses comes up. And
Exactly.
I think in a session, the therapist is able to notice those and call them out and then kind of reset and look at it differently.
And the fact that you couldn't notice them without a couples therapist is okay and makes a lot of sense when there's so many other things coming forward. So it's that really like neutral idea of therapy that it has the potential to be really beneficial in terms of just noticing the things that are really, really hard or sometimes impossible for you to notice about yourself or to notice within your relationship.
I think another fear or myth is that the partner that is wanting to go to therapy and the therapist are going to kind of side together and then go against the other partner. And that doesn't happen. I think the therapist is there to be a neutral party and to hear each person out. And I think at times it can feel like that's valid. It can feel that way if in that moment the therapist is talking to that client and validating their experience. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're siding with them. They're going to bring you back in.
Yes.
But the couple is the client. So they are going to be challenged with certain things. But I think you're right. Like anytime that couples therapy is suggested, or if you suggest couples therapy to a partner, it's usually done in a moment of conflict as being like, we need couples therapy or else this is going to happen.
Right.
And that can, like may not be the right approach again to suggesting therapy.
Right, like kind of creates even an ultimatum of what we would get out of couples therapy, in which case are we going into it with the fresh eyes of we want to be in this relationship and have a couple things that we need to work on, just as any couple on earth has a couple things they need to work on, right?
Yeah.
So, I think kind of going off of what you said and that idea of like, having someone that's kind of siding with being on the side of the therapist or vice versa. I found it really interesting when I took the emotion-focused therapy course that you kind of actually direct your attention first to the more avoidant or the person that maybe didn't bring up therapy because sometimes it's interesting to hear what their perspective on it is. And so sometimes you might go to them first because maybe they're the person that never speaks first.
Right.
Maybe they're the person that never has the last word in the argument. And so to start there is actually an active process of breaking that cycle to say, like, your feelings are valid here. Can you try expressing them? Because maybe that is something that would take a lot of practice. So even in that idea, like, I think I noticed, because I'm the more anxious person, right? Yeah. Watching them move towards the kind of more avoidant, relaxed, indifferent person is actually really important for the couple and can maybe bring out the impatience of this, like, more anxious person that I would be. But to say that, like, it's important for that partner to have their emotional experience.
And that can be really, really important for that person, right? Like, that can feel so validating if they feel like they never have that word. And so then the suggestion of therapy, if they do go reluctantly, like if they really don't want to be there, that can, again, just change the perspective of therapy, which can then benefit the couple as a whole.
Right. And just to say, like, just because you didn't initiate the therapy doesn't mean that you can't kind of join in as an active partner, and that it's the therapist's responsibility to not side with any individual, because that would actually be really not helpful at all. We're not trying to gang up on any one person, because if we've ever experienced being ganged up on, like, the last thing we're going to want to do after that is change. We'd rather probably just want to escape the situation. Right?
Exactly. So I guess to communicate to a partner, I think doing it in a time when both parties are feeling neutral, or when they're okay and things are feeling stable, and then being able to suggest therapy as something that's just going to support their already existing relationship. And so similar to the conversation we had around individuals and friends, it's saying, like, this therapy is going to help us further get closer together, learn how to communicate, learn how to work together, learn how to parent together. If there is a lot of conflict happening for parenting. So again, like, the conversation then doesn't become, we need therapy as an ultimatum. It becomes, this is just an additional resource that could help us in our relationship.
And address those stuck points or the patterns that we have, to even be able to come out of an argument and have that neutral space and say, like, wait a minute, like, we've had this argument before, and I'm wondering if maybe it would help to do something different to kind of break that cycle. And that might be couples therapy, that might be spending more time together, you know, whatever it might be, is coming from the idea of, we are a team, and this cycle is not as helpful as it could be.
And I think that just how you said that also shows a lot of compassion to the relationship. Like, look, both of us are having a difficult time communicating, or even calling ourselves out, having that awareness of, you know, I'm reactive when you communicate this way. And so, you know, maybe with therapy, that'll help us be able to talk about things in a way where we're both not feeling attacked. And so, yeah, I think, timing becomes such an important thing to suggest therapy, because in both situations, if you're in a high level of conflict, or that person already is experiencing a high level of stress, calling out that conflict or calling out therapy as a thing that's going to fix the situation or what they need, can lead to more insecurity and anxiety, like, whatever can come up, because there's already so much focus on the conflict. So it doesn't feel good.
No.
So it's important to, again, just be able to address the suggestion of therapy in a time when both people are feeling relatively stable.
Yeah, exactly. And then talking about the mutual benefit there. You know, this is not so that you stop doing what's bothering you. It's for us to learn what is happening in the bits and pieces of that process. Because it would be really hard to just sit down and dissect it on your own. And I think that's where couples therapy can be really effective. That there are some conversations or some things that would be really hard to see when you're in the middle of it.
Yeah. Is there anything else you think would be important for people to know when they're wanting to suggest therapy to a loved one?
I mean, you're not alone. I think there's always going to be people in our lives that seem like they need some support. And keeping in mind, too, the most effective therapy is going to happen when that person wants to be there, right? I think, we know that from our schooling and everything, that the therapeutic relationship that you have with your therapist is really important. And so wanting to be there is kind of the baseline. And so if someone is really, really resistant to therapy, we can try and think, maybe they're not ready for it. Maybe the timing isn't there. Maybe they want to try and figure things out on their own. So being really patient and remembering that they will do their best in therapy when they want to be there and when they become an active person in that change, as opposed to everyone in my life thinks I'm a problem.
Yeah. But even like that initial suggestion of therapy can get the ball rolling. Maybe they don't do it right away or tell you about it. And that just because you suggested it also doesn't mean that they need to come back to you and let you know that they've started or not. But just like you said, giving them that, or having patience for them to, seek therapy or find resources and support elsewhere. Yeah.
I think that's all I can think of, though. What about you?
I mean, I would say the same. I think, again, we can suggest therapy as like a very loving and supportive thing that we want for somebody, but we need to make sure that we're communicating it in the best way, in the best time. So when we are also not feeling heightened or annoyed or whatever, because if we are, then sometimes our communication doesn't come out the way that we intend it or want it to. And I think, again, it's still the experience that that person is going to have with therapy.
Yes.
And so what I have had experience with too is like, kindly suggest therapy and then say like, I know a really great therapist, here's my therapist. And that's fine. But I think it's also important to give that person the autonomy to find their own therapist, because as you mentioned, like obviously the therapeutic relationship is really important. And so the therapist that you are seeing may be an amazing fit for you, but may not be an amazing fit for me. And so being able to, again, have that patience and understanding that, if they do decide to seek therapy, they're going to find that therapist on their own, and that's okay.
Exactly.
And if they're wanting support, you can offer it like, hey, if you need help, like, let me know and I'm happy to like help you research some therapist, but also kind of leaving the ball on their court to make that that next step.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm so glad that now even finding a therapist, I find really, I mean, it can still be challenging, but I think us in the field too, it's like we really want to put forward how we are.
Yeah.
And then I'm finding even too, like matching clients with therapists is going well because, my clients are kind of saying like, oh, I read your bio online. And so it's this really individual process. And I think it's great that people are opening the idea to those around them. But I like that too. Like, do your own research and take the time for yourself to say like, oh, that just looks like someone who I could sit and chat with for an hour. Yeah. And then that's kind of the best way to start in a way is the humility of someone you just want to talk to.
Exactly. Well, hopefully some of these tips were helpful to you. And yeah, when you're suggesting therapy, just again, coming from a place of compassion and understanding, and everyone's kind of cooled down. No one's super heightened.
No heated moments for suggesting therapy.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Bethany.
Thank you. This was
Thanks
lovely.
for being here. It was. And for everyone else, we will catch you on the next episode. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Outside the Therapy Room. This podcast is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. If you reside in Ontario and are interested in working with one of our therapists, please visit our website in the show notes. If you reside outside of Ontario, a quick Google search or search through Psychology Today will help you find a therapist near you.